Hi, this is Bitcoin Asset Research with Allard. Today I'm going to talk about quantum computing and Bitcoin. So just a quick overview of the threat and of the context of what's going on. Microsoft just came out with its new quantum chip, and this is apparently the world's first quantum chip powered by topological core architecture, and it's supposed to allow quantum computing's potential to be realized within a few years and not a few decades. So this is definitely very big news in the grand scheme of things. Of course, you also have Google's Willow, which came out a few months ago, and this actually led to a big rally in quantum computing equities. So just a lot of interesting things are happening recently in quantum computing. Now, if we go back to the threat that quantum computing poses to Bitcoin, the first is really breaking ECC. This is elliptic curve cryptography, and this is using something called Shor's algorithm. Shor's algorithm is about finding the prime factors of an integer, and if you know anything about cryptography, you know that public-private key pair cryptography relies on very large prime numbers and it being extremely hard to find the factors of a number that is the product of two extremely big prime numbers. So this really gets to the heart of what modern day encryption and digital signatures rely on. Then of course you have finding the SHA-256 double hash. So it's SHA-256 double because this is the real hashing algorithm of the proof of work. They do the SHA-256 twice on the Bitcoin block header in order to generate a block header hash, which is then compared with the difficulty target in the block header to verify that the miner has performed the proof of work. And finding the pre-image for the SHA-256, this comes from something called Grover's algorithm, which also can be implemented if there was a powerful enough quantum computer. This handles unstructured search in a black box function. So that's really describing a hash function right there. If either one got cracked, it would be really, really bad for Bitcoin. So the first one is quite obvious. Your attacker can steal coins from addresses whose public keys have been exposed. Normally, addresses hide the public key because the address itself is a hash of the public key, but once you spend from the address, you do reveal that public key. So if an address has already been used in the past, that public key is already revealed on the blockchain, and somebody can take that public key and use Shor's algorithm with a powerful enough quantum computer to crack it and find the private key. And then if there are still coins sitting in that address, they would be able to move those coins. So that's also another reason why you should not reuse your addresses. But I think the second point, this finding the SHA-256 pre-image, is really what most people are underrating, and it could actually be far worse for Bitcoin. So hash rate centralization is the core issue here, and this opens the door for 51% attacks. And at the extremes of hash rate centralization, so outside of if the quantum computer held 51% of the network hash rate, if it held, say, something like 90% of the network hash rate, then you have things like timestamp attacks, which become very possible. And this could get kind of extreme, so we'll just go through what that actually means. The attacker could mine blocks at a far faster rate than the rest of the network, and they can therefore accelerate the rate of Bitcoin issuance. Bitcoin, of course, is issued from the block subsidy. Currently it's 3.125, and every 4 years it goes through a halving, so the block subsidy halves from the previous 4 years. This 3.125 Bitcoin is issued at every single block, and it's just paid to the miner. But if someone had all the hash rate, then they'd be able to mine these blocks much faster and therefore accelerate the rate of these Bitcoin issuance. Now you might say that the difficulty adjustment would kick in to fix this, but this is actually not the case under these certain sets of conditions, because you see the difficulty adjustment is based on the timestamps within the block headers. Okay, so I'll say that again. The difficulty adjustment is based on the timestamps within the block headers. This is really what that means. This is the blockchain and this is the block header, right? On the Bitcoin blockchain, the block headers have these fields in them. And you see here it says time. Well, this is the timestamp that this block is supposedly created. And it's written in Unix epoch time. So this is going to be a pretty big integer number. The miner is the one who puts this integer value into the time field. So this is the timestamp. And this field right here, this timestamp, is what the difficulty adjustment looks at when it decides whether difficulty needs to go up or down. So the Bitcoin network really references the current timestamp, and then it looks 2016 blocks back, and it says, okay, what was the timestamp for that? And it tries to set that time to 2 weeks. So you can clearly see that if you have a majority of the hash rate, you're able to control this field. You can set this time in a way where the difficulty adjustment would just not kick in. So that's what is called a timestamp attack. And really, you could read more about it here. So here they call it a time warp attack. And you can read through this to learn what they're talking about. It definitely assumes that the miners all agree on executing this attack. And if they carry something out like this, they can definitely accelerate the block time to well past the 10 minutes per block time. Now, it's important to note that nodes only go off the heaviest chain of accumulated proof of work. That's just how the proof of work consensus works. So if the attacker had majority hash rate and they also built those timestamps correctly, they could have all the full nodes except their blocks with the phony timestamps at a fairly constant difficulty. And this would be really bad. They could also make these blocks into completely empty blocks and therefore make the chain effectively useless to any real users. Another thing is if they just have 51% or more of the network, they could just do a standard chain reorg. So let's say they start at block 800,000 and then they start creating a new canonical chain. So 800,001, 800,002, all the way up to the current block. And then they would release that entire chain at once. Well, full nodes will still go for the chain with the most accumulated proof of work. So that's going to end up being that phony chain, assuming that attacker does have the majority of the hash rate. This would basically enable double spends for everyone who sent Bitcoin after block 800,000 and had that Bitcoin as a UTXO they controlled prior to block 800,000. Now, if you're finding this video interesting so far, I just ask you to like it, share it with a friend, subscribe to this channel, leave a question or a comment. I would really appreciate it. It would really help out this channel. Now, timestamping attacks can only be carried out by someone with majority hash rate, and really with a very big majority hash rate, because you can imagine that if I only controlled 51% of the hash rate, well, then there's still a 49% chance that the next block will be someone else's block, and then they could mess up my timestamping, right? Because it really depends on me controlling each and every timestamp throughout all the blocks, and especially the blocks that are handling the difficulty adjustment. So every 2016 blocks. So really, I can do this if I have a vast majority of the hash rate, and it becomes much easier to do this. And this is exactly what quantum computing potentially enables in the case of breaking SHA-256. So this could be done by a nation state who intends to destroy Bitcoin and gain an edge for its own fiat currency. So to the point of, like, let's say nation states building Bitcoin reserves, or if hypothetically the United States really did dump all of its gold and buy Bitcoin with it, well, it would be possible for, let's say, China to build a quantum computer that could do something like this and then attack the Bitcoin network and therefore devalue the US's savings as well. Or the nation state could also take that quantum computer with timestamp attacks to basically absorb all the block subsidies over the next 20 plus halvings, by also changing up how the difficulty adjustment is supposed to naturally work. So quantum computing is definitely a very, very big threat to Bitcoin. And the standard response at this point is that quantum computing will break other things first before it breaks Bitcoin. Like, it could break banks first, it could break nuclear codes, it could get the sensitive personal data, etc. Because all of these things are wrapped under the standard encryption of the day. Now, I used to think this too, but today I don't think that this is a very credible argument. And here's the reason why. These other things are secured by a combination of cryptography and trust. They're secured by a combination of cryptography and trust, okay? Fiat ledgers are ultimately written by trusted parties, and they can ultimately be rewritten by trusted parties if there is a need to provide some kind of remedy. So this is just the benefit of trust and centralization. It's just an advantage of it. And the cost of having this advantage, because again, life is full of trade-offs, but the cost of having this advantage is less personal sovereignty, and you're potentially exposed to incompetence from the trusted parties. So if the central bank doesn't know what they're doing with their monetary policy, you could have that incompetence bleed into the economy. So all of that is a cost and a risk that people using fiat ledgers, they choose to accept that risk. But notice that this risk, this cost, pays off in the event of something crazy happening, because the trust can be used as this fallback if the cryptography fails. Now, Bitcoin is very, very different. Its trade-offs are inherently very different. It's fully decentralized, and therefore its users enjoy full freedom and self-sovereignty. But the cost of that is that there is no trusted party to save the day. No one will be coming to save you. So of course, this is an all-in bet on cryptography. This is a one-way all-in bet on cryptography. If the cryptography fails or no longer suffices to provide the security it's supposed to provide, then Bitcoin is going to fail. The other stuff is not going to fail because the other stuff has a trust fallback Bitcoin does not have a trust fallback. It's only cryptography. Again, it's all in on cryptography. So fiat is cryptography and trust. Trust is that fallback plan. Bitcoin is cryptography only, so there is no fallback plan. This really shouldn't be that hard to see. Everybody who knows anything about Bitcoin understands this point, but they're just not really tying it back to how quantum computing can affect this equation. But that's why I think quantum computing is a much bigger threat to Bitcoin than it is to the fiat system. Fiat can always roll back its ledger, and it can always rapidly agree on changes, let's say implementing some kind of quantum secure change, because there are very few real decision makers. Like all of the decisions are concentrated within those trusted parties, so you can arrive at change much faster. Bitcoin can do neither of those things. It's not going to roll back its ledger, and it's very hard to agree on changes. And frankly, if it did either of those things, it would undermine its own credibility. So that's like legitimately a weakness of Bitcoin from this perspective, right? It's a strength in other ways, but the trade-off is it can show up as a weakness at other times. Now, the next thing people say is that this, meaning quantum computing, this won't happen in many, many years. Some people give it like a few decades before it happens. As you saw over here, Microsoft specifically called out not decades, referring to the fact that people have previously estimated this to take multiple decades to achieve. But yeah, the next thing people say is that it won't come in many, many years. So my issue with that is that no one really knows. Like they can't truly know. A computing expert can make one projection, but then things are changing very quickly, right? AI also changes the game too. And I want to show you guys this because this came to my attention very, very recently. And it's actually quite shocking when you think about it. This is a study about how AI has accelerated scientific breakthroughs using like this co-scientist setup, okay? So you could go down and read through this. But we could just look at the pictures real quick for a good overview of what's going on. Basically what these guys did is they had different AI agents filling different roles in this research function. And this research function is for some kind of medical stuff. The details really don't matter. It's really the results that are quite interesting. They have these agents doing mutually reinforcing work where each agent has their own respective roles within this research effort. And then they constantly feed off of each other in like these loops, okay? And then the human scientists can also put in their own input. Now, what ended up happening is that the agents were able to come up with these scientific discoveries, which real scientists also came up with. And what's really cool about it is that the agents didn't actually know about these solutions that the real scientists came up with within their training data. Okay, so the AI were not trained on this knowledge that the conventional experimental pipeline resulted in. But they nevertheless came to the same conclusion that the conventional experimental pipeline came up with. Okay, so just to really put this into perspective, the conventional pipeline is people doing the research. Okay, and look how long it took. It took from 2013 to 2025. And look how long the AI co-scientist assisted hypothesis development took. From 2024 to 2025, like this is much, much faster. The pace of AI being able to create discoveries is much, much faster. So if we take this back to quantum computing, AI definitely changes this game because you can have your human computer experts, they can make one projection, but again, things are changing very quickly. Do you know for sure that it will actually take decades when AI is now in the picture? And when we know now that AI at some point, it will be smart enough to be able to accelerate discoveries at a pace that most people will not be able to fathom. Like in light of these facts, are you still certain that it's going to take literally decades for this quantum computing stuff to develop to the point where it will become a threat to Bitcoin? That's really the question you have to answer yourself. So, and there's really one last thing here. Let's say the Bitcoin network agrees today to implement the relevant soft forks. So obviously you have BIP300, which creates the pay-to quantum resistant hash address. BIP300 was proposed pretty recently. It offers this address type which really augments SegWit and Taproot addresses so that you can use all of those things but put them within a quantum resistant hash. This would be one thing that needs to be implemented for the network to be secured against that first threat, the threat of cracking elliptic curve cryptography. So let's say this was implemented today. Well, how long will it actually take for this tech, for these addresses to be usable in a consumer application? Okay, so in other words, what I'm asking is, when does Sparrow or Blue Wallet start supporting P2QRH? When does that happen? Because neither of them has P2TR, which is the taproot address that was enabled in 2021. And this was activated 4 years ago. Now you could say that, like, this was activated 4 years ago, but there's not really significant demand for taproot addresses, so that's why these wallets haven't implemented them. You could say that, and I agree with that. But ultimately, the point stands that there is going to be some kind of lag time, right? This gets implemented today. It doesn't mean that your consumer applications will be ready to go with the quantum resistant addresses. That's not how it works. It takes a lot of time to build up these consumer applications. And sure, maybe with AI, that build up process will also be faster than it has been in the past. But that's all stuff that we don't really know about. And that's really the last fact that I am going to talk about here. So just closing thoughts. If you haven't figured out already, I really think we Bitcoiners really have to start looking into this and talking about it, and sooner rather than later acting on it. It's actually very important. Bitcoin is a great thing. It would be a shame to lose it due to mass delusional overconfidence. I think it's important to remember that there are a few things that are inevitable, but Bitcoin definitely isn't one of them. Our actions today carry forward into the future, and if we don't do something to address this threat earlier on, then we're probably going to be left behind, and by then it might be too late. Just to leave you off with this, by failing to prepare, we are preparing to fail. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a question or comment, or a suggestion for a future video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.